Welcome back to Singapore Tonight. And the main points of Budget 2020. The government is set to spend a record amount of money this year. Expenditure is expected to be $106 billion, 10% higher than last year.
The budget deficit is estimated at $10.9 billion, the highest since the global financial crisis. Brandon Tenoto with more on what this means for Singapore's overall fiscal position.
The government's operating revenue is projected to come in at $76 billion. Investment returns from Singapore's reserves contribute to the budget as well, and that's expected to come in at $18.6 billion, forming a grand total of $94.6 billion. Now we'll deduct the total budgeted expenditure of $83.6 billion and special transfers of around $22 billion. These expenses include money that goes into paying out items like GST vouchers and a wage credit scheme, as well as top-ups to endowment and trust funds like the Merdeka Generation Fund. All in, that's expected to bring Singapore to an overall budget deficit of $10.9 billion for fiscal year 2020, amounting to 2.1% of GDP, which Mr. Heng says will be covered.
With our fiscal prudence since the beginning of this term of government, we have sufficient accumulated fiscal surplus to fund the overall deficit in FY 2020. There is no draw on past reserves. We must also maintain our fiscal posture and leave enough to deal with unexpected shocks and longer-term challenges. The Constitution requires us to run a balanced budget over each term of government. We are being prudent to preserve fiscal buffers to ensure that we have the wherewithal to stand our ground and bounce back quickly if the tide turns against us. This is how we have been able to respond decisively to fight the COVID-19 outbreak and support Singaporeans and our workers. At the same time, to be able to set aside an assurance package for GST to help Singaporeans in the years ahead. The accumulated surpluses at the end of the term of government becomes part of our past reserves, which are invested. Today, the net investment returns contributions from our reserves is the biggest component of our revenue. The net investment return contributions from our reserves is the biggest component of our revenue. This is remarkable for a country with no natural resources of any kind.
Bearing in mind that the figures are still an estimate, the actual shortfall could be smaller. Singapore has always been cautious with its projections. The last time it announced a huge deficit was in 2009 during the global financial crisis, when it expected an overall deficit of $8.7 billion. The actual deficit came in at just $819 million. During the SARS outbreak in 2003, there was a $1.9 billion shortfall. And when the dot-com bust came in 2001, it was at a $2.7 billion deficit. In 2015, measures were rolled out in conjunction with Singapore's 50th birthday, which led to spending. Last year, a $1.7 billion deficit was registered, which was lower than the $3.5 billion shortfall initially projected. That's largely due to lower than expected spending caused by project delays. So where will the increased spending in 2020 go into? For one, an additional $800 million has been set aside to support frontline agencies in fighting the COVID-19 outbreak. The bulk of that amount will go to the Health Ministry, which will also be the ministry with the second highest spending at a planned $13.4 billion, which is $1.9 billion higher than the last year. It's part of the $41.6 billion that will be spent on social development. $16.3 billion will go to economic development. A portion of this total will be spent on infrastructure, like MRT development projects, for example. Security spending will come in at $22.5 billion, while government administration spending will come in at $3.2 billion, bringing the grand total to $83.6 billion. Now that's the highest spending by ministries as indicated by this chart.